Vicky, to think about building Creditcast?
So we've been tracking credit assessment, credit ratings, and their successes and failures for last 12, 13 years now. And 2008, the global financial crisis, credit rating agencies' credibility took a big hit because securities rated AAA, which was supposed to have a default frequency of less than 0.1%, ended up with 20% frequency of default, and so on and so forth. And they haven't quite recovered in terms of actual credibility, but the institutional legacy continues, because of which everyone uses still credit ratings. So we asked ourselves, is it possible to actually improve upon the accuracy of default forecast by using more data and new methods of analysis, which in this day and age are possible? So I'll just quickly go to the first slide of the presentation, which talks about how an actual example of this demonstrates a marked difference between what credit ratings would indicate and what our models would indicate to be the probability of default. This is Syntex Industries, which defaulted in June last year, so June 2019. Look at the yellow line at the bottom, this double, triple B, double B plus. The ratings barely moved. One launch downgrade, and that's it, and nothing else changed after that. And the implied probability of default moved from 1% to about 3.5%, thereabouts. Vis-a-vis that, even a simple model created by us could already predict a probability as high as 20% of default a year before the actual default, and it jumped again closer to the actual default. So this indicates how it can be dynamic and more accurate. Clearly 25% is closer to the truth than say 4%. So that got us thinking that maybe we could do a lot more with it and convert this into a full-fledged solution for potential users of in the credit assessment space.
Okay. Why do you think the conventional approaches to credit assessment being used by banks and credit rating agencies are not so effective today?
So, well, there are three reasons, many reasons, but three can be the primary drivers of it, if you will. One is there is an inherent conflict of interest at the heart of a credit rating business model, which is issuer pays for the rating. And I'm sure many of us would have heard anecdotes where rating agencies are pressurized by the issuers to not be downgraded. So default is one thing, which is a matter of fact, but a downgrade is an opinion. So often enough, there is enough sales pressure on the rating agencies to not downgrade when there is a leeway. And there is that results in the so-called ratings drift, where everything, almost everything and everyone is rated 1, 2, 3 notches over and above what they should be. Second connected point is the over-reliance on data provided by the company. And as you've seen recently, I think last year itself, rating agencies threatened to suspend the rating of almost a fifth of the issuers because of lack of cooperation. Now, that is the worst that they can do. And this creates a weird incentive for the issuer also not to share data when there is a downgrade likely, given the data, what the data indicates. And so we have a situation where when you need the ratings the most, you don't have them because the issuers don't share the data. And rating agencies, given the specific model they work with, can't work with non-issuer data beyond a point. And third is, in this day and age of artificial intelligence and machine learning doing so much for all industries across the board, credit assessment is still relying on single individual human judgment. And obviously you can team them up, but still each individual can assess only so much of data in his or her brain. And so that puts an upper limit on the bandwidth of analysis. So amongst other things, these three stand out as the major reasons for the underperformance of rating agencies.
Okay, and how does Creditcast solve for these issues?
So while the solutions are many, if I look at just these three issues, then the three answers are as follows. The simplest answer is we don't want to be paid by the company, ever. So we'll always be objective towards the company because we have no answerability to a company. So ours is a model where users or investors pay for evaluating companies they're interested in. Secondly, we take no data from companies directly. We don't request them for data, nor do we rely on them. So they submit their, so if it's listed company, then the data they submit to exchanges, and if it's unlisted, then what they submit to ROC. And subsequently, we'll see that that's only small part of the total data that we do use. So in no case are we reliant on the cooperation of a company to share data. Thirdly, we use a hybrid approach. So our systems include both pure play AI and machine learning, but also expert systems and structural models, if you will. Hopefully, these address the issues which plague the conventional credit assessment.
Okay. What have you included in the three-pronged approach?
So this is proprietary to ASCII. We evolved this approach after a fair bit of research on what works, what doesn't work, and so on. And there are some surprising learnings in each of them. But a three-pronged approach essentially combines the learnings from or assessments from machine learning model, expert system models, and capital markets model to arrive at a hopefully stable and reliable credit assessment of a company.
How does the machine learning approach apply here?
Machine learning is where, at the heart of it, it's essentially pattern recognition, right? So it's essentially asking the question, what sort of companies defaulted in the past? When I say what sort, I mean things like, what were their salient characteristics? Were they leveraged? Were they unprofitable? Did they not grow a lot? Was the management selling shares in the companies? Was the institutional ownership falling? Did the stock price behave erratically? And so on. I'm just describing briefly even some of the ratios that we use. And the surprising thing I referred to earlier is that many of the ratios that people considered useful are actually not so relevant in a machine learning context. Meaning, if you look at correlation between the historical values of the ratios and subsequent default by the companies or non-default by them, we don't see enough of a relationship to warrant inclusion of that variable. Conventional PBIT margin was one such variable, for example, where it didn't matter whether it was high or low to determine whether the company would eventually default or not. So we carefully select our features, so to speak, from a universe of almost 100 plus. We pruned it down to about 40 to 45 features, conventional data as well as alternate data. So financials, balance sheet, plus a lot of non-financial data about a company. Which then goes into a machine learning model, a set of neural nets, XGBoost, conventional logistics model, and so on, which create individual scores, and then we combine them into a single machine learning score for probability of default of that company. So that's the machine learning approach.
Okay. What do you mean by the capital market approach?
Capital markets is orthogonal to machine learning in the sense that this is based on the Nobel laureate Black, Scholes, and Merton, their models for option pricing. They also developed, Merton in particular, developed a structural model for default prediction for listed companies. And that takes into account the volatility of the company's earnings and price, as well as its assets. And essentially it posits that a company's total assets are essentially split between the debt holders, which is quote unquote the strike price of that option. And the option essentially is the balance. So assets minus debt is the company's equity value. If this equity value falls very close to zero, the incentive for the management or the promoters of the company to continue that business is very low, and hence the probability of default is very high. And so one can structurally link the stock price and market cap of a company and its debt to its probability of default using the structural model.
Okay. How is the expert systems approach different from the other two?
So expert systems is closest to the conventional analysis, if you will. In this, what we're trying to do is so we don't want to underrate or underestimate the value of human judgment, right? We are also trying to convert the human judgment into a set of rules, which can help us automate while we understand as a human being what works for a company using common sense as well as historical judgment. What works, what doesn't work. We want to convert that into an assessment of creditworthiness. That's what is expert systems. And that's used in other domains also, from science, technology, and so on. We are importing it here to say, let's ask, so the Oracle model, if you will, let's ask the intelligent people in this domain what leads to, or what is the high probability of default driver of that, and so on. And convert that into a set of rules to decide whether a company will default in the near future or not. So that's expert systems.
Okay. These three approaches sound pretty interesting. Is this the only differentiator of CreditCast from the conventional approaches used by banks and credit rating agencies for credit assessment?
So models go some distance, but as a user of machine learning approaches for last 7-8 years, I have concluded this, like many other machine learning experts or users, that models are about 10-20% of value addition. 70-80% plus value addition comes from superior data. And that's where what we refer to as the data iceberg becomes relevant. The reason we highlighted in the earlier slide also as to how conventional data is only part of the answer for credit assessment is this. So this is repeating a statement by Eric Schmidt, Google's ex-CEO, that all data is credit data. So technically you can essentially, this he's paid in the context of individuals, but it applies to companies also. And if you look at an iceberg, data iceberg, 1/8 of it is above the surface of water, which means that's the data that everyone sees and tracks. This is the financials of the company, income statement, balance sheet, cash flows, and so on. And this data is visible. It's more salient for a lot of users and a lot of analysts, but they more often than not ignore what is lying beneath the surface, which could be bulk of the relevant data, which includes all sorts of alternate data, macro data, sector data, which has a lot of implications for a company's credit assessment, especially in a real-time sense. So in the long run, yes, the financials matter, but credit assessment needs to be done dynamically. And as far as dynamic credit assessment is concerned, or timely credit assessment is concerned, it's the submerged part of this data iceberg that makes the difference.
Okay. We can see a lot of data points here. Can you explain any one in detail, like the sectoral data? How is it sourced? And more importantly, how does it influence the credit assessment?
So like the example you mentioned, sectoral data, look at, so if I rely on a company's financial results every quarter, I'll have to wait for the Jan, Feb, March data about the company coming out only in mid-April, late April, early May. Whereas if I know the sector of the company, which everyone knows, I can use IIP data, RBI data on sectoral credit, and also WPI data and other such sector-specific data to assess what's going on in the sector even through the quarter. So Jan IIP data is out in Feb, Feb data is out in March, and so on. So even while the quarter is going, I already know, our systems already know how the financial health of the sector is changing in terms of price, in terms of credit, in terms of sales growth. So all of these things go into creating the sector overlay on a company's underlying model. And so if sector is performing poorly, then you also know that credit quality of companies in that sector is going to deteriorate through this quarter. And companies on the brink then are more than likely to go into the high PD zone. So that's how I guess sectoral data is sourced and used.
Okay. Have you done any back testing for the PD scores?
We have indeed. So we, and obviously we stuck to using the split between training data and testing data. And what we're presenting here is the testing data. So it's far more reliable. So there is a whole lot of data here, so I don't want to confuse our audience. We've taken out one specific graph, which is the most salient. This is, let's assume ASCII and conventional ratings both predict a certain probability of default for a company, and we bucket it by ratings, AA, A, BBB, BB, etc. And then we see the multiple of actual default frequency versus predicted default frequency. One would be obviously the ideal ratio, and below one would be conservative assessment, and above one would be liberal assessment, liberal being obviously bad in this case. The red bars show the multiple of frequency of defaults vis-a-vis predicted for rating agencies, which is anywhere between 3 and 5. So the actual defaults are 3 to 5 times more frequent than what is predicted by most agencies. And this is what I call, or what most experts call, a ratings drift. Everything is rated a bit too highly for its own good, for obvious business conflict reasons. The green bars, which is the ASCII assessment, the credit card assessment, shows value close to 1, and at higher level at AA it shows a value lower than 1, which means it's a bit more conservative. But that's obviously better along the lines of being safe rather than sorry. But that's one part of the outcome. There are a lot of other data points which we can share with the interested audience, who can then look at the confusion matrix and other such nuanced outputs. So I think this is as far as the presentation is concerned. So what we'll do now is quickly go on to the actual web platform of our of Creditcast and see how that actually is to be used. So Palak, are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen now.
Super. So this is the landing page. You can create an account here, or you can just log in with your existing Google account. Either one is fine. Register without Google and log in with Google. So I already have one account, so I'm logging in. So this is the landing page where we can, so this is bulk of the offering within Creditcast, the company report. So you can start by typing name of the company. You will end up seeing a company. Click on that, you see a specific company report. So Palak, over to you again for the questions on the reports.
Yes. What is the specific benefit of using these three approaches in arriving at the credit score for each company?
So what happens is each approach has its limitations and its strengths. And so it's better to use multiple approaches to stabilize the outcome and also to not miss out on any red flags. For example, a company might be doing very well in terms of its conventional financials, but may have some problems in terms of some hidden variables that machine learning models capture, but not the expert systems. Or it could be that the company's fortunes have changed a lot in the last 2 months, but neither the variables used in machine learning or the expert systems have caught on to that yet, but the equity markets have caught on to it. And so then you'll end up seeing a dip in its equity market-based score and so on. So we want to use multiple sources of red flags, if you will, to arrive at the total score, hence the three approaches.
Okay, and what is the weightage given to each approach when you're deriving the final score?
We started with equal weight. Then we realized that it's a bit too liberal. So we essentially now exclude the highest score. So we just use the two lowest scores and take their average.
What do we make of the risk score of the company, and how does the risk score translate into the PD?
So the reason we created a risk score as against a PD, and obviously they are directly translatable into each other, is that at the highest quality level, which is where majority of the large companies are, there's too much crowding. So a PD of 0.1 versus 0.4, the salience of this difference is lost on a user if you simply look at it as 0.1 and 0.4%, and everything else is 5%, 8%, and so on. So we want to essentially distinguish the 0.1 from 0.5 and 0.5 from 1.5. So the risk scores are much more spread out in that low risk zone and a little bit more compressed in the high risk zone. So this table here shows the risk score to PD mapping. 10 is sovereign, 0. 8 is 0.2, 0.6. So all the way to 4, it's only 1.1%. And then it rapidly goes down. At 1, it is 7.6%, and 0.1, which is close to 0. 0 is actual default. 0.1 is almost 47-50%. And this graph here shows the variation of the credit risk score over time, and also the universe as well as the sector of the specific company we're talking about.
Okay. Which are the key parameters used to analyze the financial performance of companies?
So this is obviously a more model specific question. In case of machine learning models, as we talked about, 40 plus variables. Not all of them are listed here because that will get too detailed. For expert systems, we use a set of 7-8 variables. Some of them are listed here. So we use these derived variables like growth rate, margins, leverage, working capital and to sales, return on equity, sales to asset, and so on. These are listed here more to complete the picture for a typical user. rather than to map them to the actual output that we do have.
Okay. Does the report also include average numbers for the industry or the sector also?
That's a crucial one, and so yes, we do include that along with a spider chart which shows how does a company compare vis-a-vis its sector. These numbers here, the scores of the company and sectors, show along 6 major parameters: profitability, operating efficiency, growth, leverage, capital markets, and capital efficiency. 0 is worst, 100 is best, and average would be around 50, which is what is shown here in sector scores. This is universal average. That's why some sectors will still have poor growth, will show sub 50, and may have great capital markets performance, may show above 50. So this spider chart shows us that this company, RIL in this case, is better on most counts except for capital efficiency, which is ROE, ROA, and so on. But yeah, this would be a good picture. The sector isn't doing so well, but the company is actually in good shape.
Okay. Will the report include facts which stand out for a company on the positive as well as the negative side?
It does. So what we want to highlight is some of this could get actually fairly detailed for a typical user. So we also want to focus his or her attention on a few good things and a few not so good things. So which are the biggest areas of concern and which are the biggest areas of strength? So not the whole list, but just the 3 most important ones and their degree of severity. Like, is it major or minor? So in this case, for example, current ratio is some area of concern, but not a major one. It's just low. Debt to equity ratio is also a concern, but very mild. Area of strength, dividend yield is very high. So that obviously shows up as a very high degree. Net worth growth is good. Receivable days are very low. So that also shows up as an area of strength. So each company will have its 3 areas of concern and 0 to 3 areas of concern and 0 to 3 areas of strength.
Okay. What indicators of the capital market performance are used, and how are these indicators interpreted to infer upon the credit risk of the company?
So we use a large number of indicators. So there are 2 parts to it. One is the so-called capital markets indicators as a part of machine learning model. And the second is the structural motor model that we talked about earlier. So in terms of capital market indicators used in the machine learning model, we use its price performance, its volatility vis-a-vis its peers as well as the universe, price to book ratio, the yield, shocks to price, if any, and so on. And in this case, we see that this specific stock has done remarkably well over the years. So obviously, its risk from this angle, at least, comes out to be quite low. The Merton model is what we talked about earlier. In this company's case, it's unusually low probability of default because the price has done very well. And its distance to default is also very comfortable, which means its assets are about 4 times more than its debt. So very low probability of equity being worthless.
Okay. How do you assess the refinance risk of companies as a part of your analysis?
So that comes under expert systems. So here we do 2 things. One, we look at the probability of interest default. So that is simply saying if EBITDA, we use a Monte Carlo simulation on the volatility of EBITDA margin, what are the chances that EBITDA will fall below interest due? And in this specific case, it is close to 0, so it doesn't matter. For many companies, it is 1%, 2%, 5%, so on. Then we look at refinance, which is, let's assume the interest is payable, that's fine. And then the EBITDA part of it is left now to service the repayment of principal. Principal can be repaid through 3 sources: EBITDA, as in operational cash flows, cash and balance sheet, and refinance. So the need for refinance is driven by the fact that is your operational cash flow enough to repay interest plus the due principal? For many companies, it's not. But then they have some cash on the balance sheet. Now, if there is no cash on the balance sheet, then the need for refinance becomes very high. And then what enters the picture is ability to get refinance. Here, banks conventionally look at profitable, high growth, and low leverage companies, amongst other things. So we have a model which actually predicts the ability of a company to get bank finance, which is the predominant mode of finance in the country. So when the ability is high, even if the need is high, it's not a very high risk for refinance. The ability is also a function of the market situation, credit market context, which could go up and down independently at a macro level. But if the ability is low and the need for refinance is high, then it's a very high risk situation. So cash flow based risk score then turns out to be very low. So that's how you look at refinance in our model.
Okay. So as a user, if I have a portfolio of companies that I want to track in terms of how the credit risk is evolving, can the Creditcast platform help me?
Certainly. So we want to actually look at Creditcast as not only a single company evaluator, but also a set of companies that I want to track on an ongoing basis. So which is this tracker. So I can create a new portfolio. I have created already here one, so I'm just using that. I've listed 5 companies here whose default probabilities are listed here: conventional rating and fair yield if I were to lend to them, and the last week's value of this PD to check if it's gone up or down. I can add any number of companies here, and this portfolio or the list of companies and their PDs will update on its own every time the backend at ASCII's end changes. So I don't have to do anything new other than just logging in and checking what the values are, and if anything stands out as a red flag. The portfolio summary also, which I can export to CSV, and any number of portfolios I can create to track different types of exposures, if you will.
Okay. I can see other tabs on the platform, high risk companies and low risk companies. Can you please explain those?
High risk is where you want to get a quick bird's eye view of the riskiest companies according to us, which are listed here with their PDs and their conventional ratings and so on across sectors. You can select them by sectors, saying I want to look at alcohol, in this case nothing, automobiles, 2 companies stand out as big risk. And I can look at high risk or medium risk. So then the rest of the list. I can also look at mid cap, not just large cap. And so if I delete this, then it's across the capitalization levels, or I can select this and get specific companies which are in that specific segment. In a rare case, I may want to say that I want to look at all companies which are high risk in a certain rating range. So these are the these are the companies which are rated AA plus, let's say, and they have fairly high risk according to our calculations. Likewise, you can go for any rating level and also double that up with sector and so on as well. So you can play around with this to figure out which companies are high risk by either rating or sector or market cap or a combination of all of it. Similarly, low risk. So high risk is good for chief risk officers or CFOs tracking the counterparty risk of their companies. Low risk is good for business development teams or relationship managers, which is to look at which companies are lowest risk in a given rating level, sector, or market capitalization. And one can then presumably look at these companies as good targets for lending.
Got it. What do we make of the ratings risk mismatch tab?
This came up because some queries by a few users who said that some companies are known to be high risk and some companies are known to be low risk. So we don't want to know just what is high risk and what is low risk. We want to know which are the high risk companies amongst the companies rated highly, which means they are AAA or double A, but according to you they're high risk. So that's where we created this subset. So rating risk mismatch. So this could be underestimation, which is the risky one, and overestimation, which is a hidden gem thing. So let's look at underestimation first. So these companies listed here in the large market cap segment are the ones which are, in a sense, trickiest because their ratings, according to us, don't reflect their probability of default. So conventional rating BBB minus means a PD of like 2-3% maybe, whereas we think it's close to 10 for this one. Adani Power, Ashok Leyland 2.93, whereas its rating is AA. So that means we think its default probability is underestimated by almost 3 percentage points, and so on and so forth. Now, you can also, as the previous one, you can do it by sector, you can do it by market capitalization, you can also do by current rating. The other thing you can look at is overestimation, which is companies which actually have a poor rating, and actually we believe that they are not as poor for whatever reasons. As in, our models indicate that they're not as worse off as the rating seems to indicate. Or in some cases, it could be the rating is good, but the company is unusually safe, in which case that's also a case of overestimation.
Okay. Is there any data available at the sector level as well?
So sectors also, we do two things. One is simple probability of default at a sector level. So look at here that PD current as well as last year, there are about 36 sectors which people can study. You can even export to a CSV. As you can expect, everything has become worse because of COVID. All sectors PD has gone up. Normally you will have some going up, some going down. You can look at super sector view, which is just 8 sectors, or industry groups, if you will, or subsectors, which are about 102. So very granular. This is just the raw value of probability of default. You can also look at comparison to conventional ratings. So which sectors are overrated, which sectors are underrated. So if I do this, I look at the textile industry being most overrated vis-a-vis conventional rating agencies. Aviation also, the ratings don't just reflect the actual high risk, so on and so forth. So that's the sector level data which we do publish every week.
Okay. Do you cover the unlisted companies as well in Creditcast?
We do. So not all of them, about 10,000 biggest unlisted companies. So say Reliance Jio. So given that they're not listed and they don't have capital markets data available, the approach is slightly different. But we use something called nowcasting based on listed counterparts as well as macro data and sector data to not have to rely on a company's annual disclosures only. So we do actually have a dynamic assessment change in a company's PD, even if it's unlisted, and discloses data only once a year. So this would be a similar report with some variation.
Okay. How do you analyze the quasi-sovereign issuers?
So quasi-sovereign is an interesting category, and we pay extra attention to it because after ILFS, we realized that most people misunderstand the nature of sovereign ownership and its liability. So we created a separate additional element of inclusion of sovereign ownership effect. So look at NTPC, for example. This is a summary part of it, but the report is same as a typical company from this point on, the risk score by source and all that. And if NTPC were not owned by government, then this would be its score, 7.9, which is say 0.2% sort of PD, not too high, but not sovereign either. And then we have this adjustment mechanism, which looks at 3 things: extent of government ownership, which if it's below 50, then it's almost private. And then the government has very little, which was the case with ILFS, for example. Route of ownership, again, ILFS was indirect. It was minority and indirect, and this is majority and direct. And operational efficiency, how is the company in its own right, irrespective of the ownership? This case is average, that's not too bad. So this PSU status improves the score from 7.9 to 9.2. Now, this is a judgment-based improvement, but it takes into account the fact that these 3 facts exist, and the company is not explicitly guaranteed by the central government, unless it is, in which case it's a different matter.
Who do you expect will be the users of Creditcast?
We envisage 3 types of users. One is CFOs of companies looking to track the counterparty risk of their customers, B2B customers. Second is analysts and researchers amongst lenders, so banks, NBFCs, and FPIs, AIFs, debt mutual funds, and so on. And third is participants, either family offices or individuals or their advisors, participants in debt capital markets who invest directly, not through a mutual fund.
Okay. How is Creditcast different from the plethora of equity research reports available publicly?
Normally, equity research reports would cover things such as valuation, buy, sell, recommendations, and value, sort of a DCF, etc. of the company. That's on the equity side of the balance sheet. We are looking at a capital structure. We're looking at the debt side of capital structure, forecasting its credit worthiness and not stock price.
Okay. So as a user, the final credit score will help me decide whether I want to take credit exposure to a specific company or not. So what will be your recommendation of the lowest score below which I should not consider any exposure in the company?
So obviously, it's a function of the level of credit risk the underlying investor slash evaluator wants to include in the portfolio. But it suffices to say that excluding the super safe liquid funds and zero risk portfolios, for all others, any score below 6 should sort of create a red flag. A score below 4 would be a major issue, and below 2 is a disaster in the making. So that's the broad mapping. These don't map to credit ratings. So we could have a AA rated company also with a score of 2, and a B rated company with a score of 9. So these are not one-to-one mappings between ratings and scores.
Okay, is Credcast available in a non-website format as well?
Yeah, so the website format is more for our sort of non-institutional users, if you will. We expect that many institutional users may want to use the API version of our offering. So Credcast is also available as an API for an institutional user to plug into their technology stack directly.
Okay. What is the subscription fee for Credcast?
So we want to keep it sort of reasonable and very manageable for early users. In future, we may revise it, but for now, we're offering single reports only at about 100 rupees for one report. At one point of time, you can take it then 20 more times, but by paying every time the same value. Second is if you want to just look at multiple companies, but not immediately, through the year sometime, then you can take like a pack of 10 for 500 rupees. And if you are a researcher who looks at many companies every month anyway, then it's about 1,000 rupees a month for full access to all reports and so on. These are all at a non-institutional level. At an institutional level, enterprise license of sorts, which is more a one-to-one conversation with the company. And in general, it will be through the API route.
Okay. So we can now take some questions from my audience.
So Chetan, you can start enable the Q&A from users. I think we have a few.
Yes, we have a few questions. One question is, how do you anticipate the future outlook of a company, which is much more important?
So short answer is that our work is very forward-looking. A lot of the things that we're doing essentially relate to forecasting, and in fact, we take pride in our forecasting technology. So everything we do essentially is driven by the fact that we want to see what happens to a company in the next 1 year or next 2 years, not what happened to it so far. The future outlook can come from 2-3 different sources. One is the capital markets, which do tell us a lot about what's going to happen in a company's future. And second is our expert systems, which also suggest how the company is placed to handle the vagaries of macro data. And last but not the least, macro data itself is generally a leading indicator of a company's future behavior.
Okay. Does the efficacy of the model vary a lot between financial companies like banks and NBFCs and the non-financial companies?
So short answer is yes. We do have a very different model for financial companies. And so in that, what happens is you have to look at underlying assets, not the company itself. So Merton model can still work for non-financial companies, but for our conventional expert systems, it won't work. So we have to approach it very differently. Banks we have kept out of for now. We want to only look at NBFCs because they are a little bit more focused. They tend to have very few NBFCs have many different lines of business. Many of them will tend to be focusing on one or two types of asset classes. So that enables us to take a little bit more in-depth assessment of that company. We can look at one NBFC report here, but I think that's still getting uploaded. So that's available in the API format, not in the web version. We are going to put that up soon as well.
Okay. Most of the risk management policies as approved by the board of the companies are aligned with the more conventional AAA to the B+ ratings. How can we convince the board that the ASCII ratings should be brought into these internal policies?
The short answer, of course, is some sort of live tracking and backtesting. So I understand backtesting, people have their concerns about it being overfit and so on, but it can at least be a starting point where one can say, here's what the defaults look like and as they happened in terms of how they were rated. And here's what the ASCII scores were when the companies were close to default, like the Syntex example we saw. We can generalize that. We already have the data for it. We can obviously share it with a likely user. And then essentially tell them that these are some indicators which can initially use almost in addition to the credit ratings, and eventually, hopefully, will replace them. But right now, it's the modest ask is to say, use this also. At worst, you will ignore it. At best, you will find a red flag and save a bunch of money by focusing on that red flag. So we are essentially saying the ensemble that we use, the three models, we create one rating. Likewise, a bank or a board can say, we've been using only credit ratings, and now we'll use one more, and let's use whichever one shows a red flag. So somebody downgrades the rating significantly, that's also a red flag, even if our score is good, which will be rare, but let's say it may happen. More realistically, ratings are stable, but our score seems to suggest a deterioration. So then that can essentially prompt the risk team to look at that company in depth. They may still conclude that all is well with it, or they may stumble upon something which helps them save a lot of money later on.
Okay. Have we compared the conventional credit ratings with the ASCII rating and seen how stable they are? Are these ratings aligned? And if they are not aligned, then what is the reason for the problem?
So let's say this. We have looked at simple mapping, and it's not a clear one-to-one map. There are 2-3 different reasons. One is that conventional ratings tend to be very sensitive to size. So if you are a 5,000 crore company, then there is a floor to the rating almost. And if you are a 500 crore company, then there is a ceiling to the rating, which is archaic, but that's how it is, firstly. Secondly, ratings change very gradually. So for the vast majority of the companies, the ratings and ASCII scores might be in line with each other. But for the few that eventually default, the divergence is much more sharper for ASCII scores than it is for ratings. So ratings continue to be stable, whereas the ASCII scores dynamically shift towards worse and worse as the defaults approach. So in that defaulting subset, which is the most important subset of this analysis, the divergence is much larger. And the reasons we disclosed earlier also, our data sets are larger, so we are able to track sources of problems from larger sort of drivers, and our models are superior, because of which the same data speaks to us a bit more than it speaks to the conventional analysis.
Okay. How frequently are the reports updated?
So that's once a week, because that takes into account 2-3 different things. One, the capital market side changes every day, so we summarize it for the week and include it in one shot. And then asynchronously data keeps coming. So for example, macro data, some IIP data will come in this week, some WPI data will come next week. Companies' reports will keep coming throughout the quarter. So once a week is when everything gets updated, every Friday effectively.
Okay. What is the source of data for all the analysis apart from the financials of the company?
So generally, we look at publicly available sources like RBI and Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation for macro data. There are more tech-oriented data sets like Google Trends and sentiment indicators, some of which are available for everyone free of cost. Some are available at a price from data vendors. And then there are some data sets which are created by us based on publicly available information. So all three sources. And of course, last but not the least, the exchanges for the capital markets data, whether it's ownership or price behavior or insider buying and selling of shares or pledge of shares.
Okay. Do you have any ratios for cash analysis of companies, since today the balance sheet numbers are susceptible to manipulation?
Yeah, so this is one of the major things that has plagued the conventional credit assessment paradigm, which is 30, 40 years ago, it was fine to look at a company's leverage. So when Altman Z-score first came about, it was okay to look at profitability, leverage, and a few other things. But as lending started to depend on these ratios, people started to, as in promoters, companies started to manage these ratios in some form or other. And so there is an interesting book on this called Financial Shenanigans, which talk about both simple as well as extreme versions of this. So like Enron was the extreme version, which was just fraudulent. But leaving aside even those cases which are fraudulent, we have a lot of cases which are completely legal, compliant, but still managed. So then the picture from accounting ratios is not enough. Problem with cash flow ratios is that it is not published every quarter in India, unlike US, where it is balance sheet and P&L are both quarterly. So what we do is we use a set of proxies as well as set of models to arrive at balance sheet information or its indicators. So for example, interest is known every quarter. So interest to sales ratio, more often than not, is a good indicator of jump in short-term borrowings, which generally happens on account of either inventory or receivables piling up, both of which are obviously red flags from a credit assessment perspective. So interest to sales becomes an interesting indicator, which stands in for the balance sheet variables. So that's one example. We have several others, which allow us to use available indicators to infer the balance sheet indicators to the extent possible.
Okay, we have one question. In the real world, there is an acquisition and a behavioral model. Where does the ASCII model fit in? Should we use it for acquisition or for portfolio management?
Well, short answer is both, meaning there are, so if you look at the two risks lists that we publish, they actually indicate that, or three in fact. Our high risk list is what I would suggest you use for risk tracking, right? Which companies of your current lending portfolio have, if they show up in this high risk list, then that's a problem. Or you can track your current portfolio with the high risk side. The low risk ones are obviously acquisition targets. Those are companies which one can go after to lend to them. And more importantly, the risk rating mismatch, as according to us, will be the ideal targets for acquisition, because there you have lists of both types. The lists you need to stay away from because they're overrated, and lists that are underrated. Companies like Hidden Gems, which are safe, but nobody is lent to them for whatever reasons.
Okay. Can you explain some ratios used in each of the models?
So one ratio. So we talked about the receivables ratios, or let's look at the non-financial ratios in machine learning, right? We often use the ratio of institutional ownership and changes in it, more importantly. Generally, reduction in institutional ownership signifies lack of confidence in the company's future prospects or governance, or sometimes both. So that's a very useful indicator. And there's also the ratio of interest to sales, as I referred to earlier, or even receivables days to sales. In case of Merton model, we use total debt to market cap as a ratio, and also the volatility of its earnings as well as its share price. Obviously smooth out over a long period so that it's not varying too much from one week to next. And for expert systems, we use interest to EBITDA as well as interest plus principal to EBITDA, and principal repayable minus cash on balance sheet to net operational cash flows. So just some examples of ratios.
Okay.
I think that's pretty much all the questions that we have here, I guess.
Yes.
Super. Sounds good. So, well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us in this launch. Thanks, Palak, for all the questions. And we hope that you check out the platform and also let us know your feedback. What we've done right, what we're doing not so right, where can we improve, whether it's analysis or interpretation or even simple representation. What would you like to see in the reports? What do you think is too much detail too soon? And what other aggregates are relevant, which can help people take better credit decisions. So thanks again, and welcome to Creditcast. Please feel free to use our platform and let us know the feedback. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.